right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, our February edition of the Inspired Learning Project Digital Conversation. We're thrilled to welcome you here. As you know, each month we gather in order to talk with educational leaders who are doing the tough work of reimagining school, looking at ways to emphasize agency, deep inquiry, and real work that matters. And we're thrilled tonight to have a guest with us who is really pioneering the idea of making school do real work that matters and believing in the power of students. So we're going to be interviewing Chad Carlson from One Stone. And in order to get our interview underway, I'm going to pass it over live to Dave in the bunker, who will kick it off for us.
Thanks so much, John. And Chad, thanks so much for carving out some time for this evening. So, Chad, we know you from One Stone, the high school, but One Stone's a much larger endeavor. And we're wondering if you just kind of tell us your story of One Stone and where you are now, where you've come from, and where you're looking to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to tell the story well, we have to start from the beginning. About 13 years ago, One Stone started up as a nonprofit after-school program, really rooted in experiential service. It was a small organization, handful of students, couple of adults that really went out in the world trying to make the world a better place and students better leaders. And as it began to grow, it became more popular among students from a number of different high schools, Treasure Valley, and probably at its largest, started serving close to about 150, 200 students from 50 different Treasure Valley high schools, where students would come in after school from about 2:30 onward and get involved in experiential service. They loved it. They loved what they were doing. They were feeling the impact, not just on the people they were working with, but on themselves as well. And as the work continued to grow, they got more and more interested in growing the organization. I guess before I go further, a unique aspect of the organization is that it is a student-driven and a student-led organization. So 2/3 or more of the students or of the board members are actual students. And so that's a very unique aspect of the organization itself. As the after-school program continued to grow, Two Birds was conceived, and Two Birds is really a student-led ad or creative studio and design agency. There was Project Good, which was the experiential service learning program, and then Solution Lab, which was the student incubator or student-led business incubator. So they had those three programs in an after-school kind of format. And as students were getting more and more involved, they were having a harder and harder time going back to school and not just staying at One Stone. And they began to ask themselves, why can't learning be like this? We're going out in the world making a real difference, learning a lot of both hard and soft skills. Be it in communication or empathy or even in research and writing and pitching to local community organizations. And it felt like real world learning for them. And so in the spring of 2015, a group of students asked, why can't we do this as a school? And the board organized a 24-hour think challenge where they brought together 100 or so junior-high school students, so high school students in their junior year, and a number of experts and specialists in education. And they used the design thinking process in 24 hours, and they tried to address the question, how might we reimagine education? And with that, One Stone, the lab school, was born. I think the biggest takeaway from that 24-hour think challenge that both the adults and the students realized was that high school, the schools that these students had been attending, were neither relevant, and so their learning they found totally irrelevant and disconnected to what they would be doing in the real world, and not providing a platform in which they could pursue their passions. And so they really set out to organize a school that would both engage in relevancy and student passions. And so that's where the high school came out of, was trying to create a program that has both relevancy and the opportunity for students to explore who they are, what their purpose is, and how to pursue their passions, and their passions as a skill. So today, One Stone is really four programs. It's a single organization, nonprofit. It continues to be governed by 2/3 students. It has Two Birds, Solution Lab, the Project Good, and now the Lab School.
And it's a tuition-free school, correct?
It is a tuition-free school, and the reason we're tuition-free is we feel like tuition-free, one, allows for equality of voice, and two, it allows us to serve a diversity of students where tuition doesn't get in the way of students being able to attend. And so both our after-school programs are tuition-free, and our lab school is tuition-free.
That's incredible. I think, I think the piece where your board is, 2/3 students, I'm wondering if to a certain extent, knowing that this model worked from an after-school program gave you the courage to go into the actual school governance mode because you've had that experience, you know what it looks like. Was that helpful in terms of seeing and developing that vision for a school?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think just having that experience with the board and being able to take on something a lot more complex, because the board is still governing the the actual nonprofit, but now has this this day lab school as part of its programming. So I think having the board start out as just kind of that nonprofit governing board was really important as far as developing experience and learning how to onboard new students, because when you have a student-led board, you have students who age out. And so you have a rotation of 2 or 3 years. And so onboarding new board members every year is part of the experience. And they've gotten really good at it. It's a very professional board, very organized board. I've served on a couple of nonprofit boards here in the area, and this one by far is the most effective, the most well organized, and it's just really cool to see.
I think, that the students having skin in the game for organizing this board and the decisions that they make really have a direct impact on their school experience, their after school experience. I think that helps, but also this piece where they get to be not only leaders, but mentors, because you've got to bring that next crop of board members along is really critical. I want to transition just a little bit into what the school day looks like. You mentioned design thinking is a critical component of your work. You also do competency-based assessment. So can you give us a little bit of information of what a day in the life of a One Stone student would look like?
Well, certainly. So, number one, I think it's really important to just set out that our purpose as an organization is that we believe in the power of students. And so students very much drive what the day-to-day looks like. They've helped us organize the courses that they'll take. They help us design the schedule, so what the daily and weekly schedule looks like. Students are at the heart of our design lab, which is our project-based learning component where we use design thinking to solve or address human-centered needs or problems in the Treasure Valley. And so really, a day in the life of One Stone student, we have about 110 students, probably looks like 110 different things, because each student is able to design their own experience. They do take, we call them collaborative courses. They're small courses of maybe 10 to 15 learners with a coach. Learning objectives and the focus and whatnot is designed with the learner. And so those students will help drive the direction and the focus of those courses. And so, that's about a third of what we do in those courses. About another third of what we do is our design lab, where we're using design. And really there's significant amount of time for students to work in their design lab teams where they're being partnered with community partners and using the design thinking process to not just solve problems, but identify and understand problems, using really different frameworks of exploring and empathizing with the end user and the community partners. And then going through and ideating solutions, prototyping those solutions with their community partner, and eventually implementing them and reflecting on the impact that they had on both their end user and themselves. And then the other third, what we do is, it's a program we call Life in Beta. And It's kind of a mix of our advisory program with a winter term that we do in January and our summer experience term that we do in June and July, where students are really taking a lot of time to develop relationships with adult mentors, and they're learning about themselves, learning about their purpose in the world, trying to take their interests and explore those interests and realize their passions and develop the skills and the tools to pursue their passions as they continue both through the program and matriculate out and head out into the world, whether that's into college or into a career field. And so, really the three things that a One Stone learner might do in a day is get involved in Life and Beta, Design Lab, and their collaborative courses.
So yeah, Chad, that sounds exactly what my student teaching prepared me to do in my program, and I went to a pretty progressive one as well. But I'm curious about, how do you find folks who fit and can do this kind of work, and in particularly, what was it about your own education experiences that led you to this type of teaching and learning?
Yeah, those are two great questions. I think as far as finding people, are you talking about finding the coaches, the adults, or finding the students?
Well, I think first finding the people that can support the students. I know that, as we talk, even students within our district, there's that yearning for more relevant learning. I think the challenge is really executing it, and the language matters. I love how you call them coaches. So can you talk a little bit about kind of the roles within One Stone?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, just kind of what kind of backgrounds they have to be able to do this kind of work.
Yeah, so the backgrounds of our coaches, we have coaches who have experience in education. We have coaches who are patent attorneys. We have coaches who have worked in different fields. I'm trying to think of, we have a PhD in science who worked at a university. We've got two patent attorneys. We've got a man who's worked in community college in High Tech High in San Diego. I have an artist on board who's worked in the area of art in the community, and we really take people who have a growth mindset, and people who are willing to relearn education, because I think a lot of us have been educated in very traditional ways, and so oftentimes you end up working with students in a very similar way in which you were raised and educated, and so we're looking for individuals who have a growth mindset, an open mindset, who are willing to be vulnerable and really step aside and let students lead, and be there for them when they need coaching and guidance and mentorship, but not leading by being out front. We look for coaches that are kind of jacks of all trade, but masters of none. And so those who are really willing to take risks and embark in endeavors that they might not have a lot of experience in, but are willing to learn alongside their students. So how do we find those individuals? Our application process to work at One Stone is, I wouldn't call it rigorous, but it's pretty thorough. They go through a series of 3 different interviews with different groups within the school, and they also spend time with students and get interviewed by our students, so the 4th group. And I think by the end of that, which is usually a 4 to 6 week process, you have a pretty good feeling of who the individual is, and if they'll fit culturally and how they feel, as far as willing to take risks and try new things. And so, we're very open to who we take. There are times where we need people who have more of an engineering focus or a mathematic focus, or can work with students in the area of writing. So we'll start out there. But we're really looking for people who are interested in learning themselves and see themselves as learners as well, and don't see themselves as teachers per se, who are there to just simply instill education and knowledge, but they're willing to learn alongside the learner. And so in my experience, I am somebody who's come from the field of education. I'm in my 20th year of education. Primarily in independent school education. I've worked in IB programs. I've worked in college prep, high schools. I've worked in liberal arts, so everything from social science to language arts and also world language. And I've been a director at a couple different schools, as well as a curriculum coordinator. I think what has shaped me the most was my first year of teaching when I was young. Had no idea I wanted to teach. There was a great job. I spoke Spanish. I thought, I'll give it a try. I was surrounded by perhaps the most amazing educators I've ever had the honor of working with. Very focused in project-based learning, very believing in the students and trusting in the students, and giving the reins to the students. And so from day one, that's how I learned how to do it, and that's how I saw how it was done. And I've always aspired to be like them. And so that early experience for me was really important. And then also just a lot of learning through experience, and you know, being a risk taker and not worrying about failure. And so, you know, I've never done the same thing, you know, 2 years in a row. I'm always reinventing myself, and I think that sense of willingness to try new things, do things differently, has really been important in kind of for that we work with at once as well.
So I think when you bring together passionate, creative educators with a diverse set of skill sets and combine that with, you know, curious, passionate students, some really incredible products can come out of it, if not an awesome process. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the work that's going on, some student work that's going on, particularly, you know, we're big believers in this idea of real work that matters. What does that term mean at One Stone? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so I mean, real work that matters. I think it's easy to start thinking about some of our successful projects. I think the real work that matters really is found in the day-to-day and the interactions of working with students. And I often tell both the coaches and the students, it's not always important. I mean, it is, but it's not always, you know, the bottom line of what you're doing. So much of it is how you're doing it. And so we focus so much on process. We focus a lot on language. We focus on how we're doing things. You know, some of the cool projects that have come out of One Stone that have really kind of touched upon the different programs that we have really come out of our design lab, which are also a very process-based endeavor. And so I think when I think about a successful project, we have one that I think is going right now. It's called Clutch. We had I think 6 students. They started out as a group of 6. They whittled down to a group of 4, and they wanted to address the issue of texting and driving. And it was really cool to see them jump in. You know, high school students. I think they were in their second year at One Stone, so they were juniors. And they kind of jumped in with this kind of bias that texting and driving is mainly a young driver issue, a teenage driver issue. And as they began doing their empathy work and really kind of just going slow, interviewing students, interviewing adults and parents, and interviewing law enforcement, they found that the group that has the worst or the worst with texting and driving are parents. You know, people like myself, 25 to 45. And so they started working with a group of parents, a focus group, and came up with a really cool idea for an app that they would create as a gaming app. So a competitive way to encourage drivers to stay off their phones, stay off text while driving. Why I like this project so much is it was, you know, so impactful for the students that once our design lab projects were done and they presented, they decided to bring these on. And so the Clutch team started in fall of 2008, and here we are in the spring of 2017. And here we are in the spring of 2019, and they're still moving along. They've moved it from the school into the after-school solution lab, where they're trying to incubate this business idea, and they're now trying to create the algorithms for an app that they're going to create. They've taken it to DC and pitched it to the National Transportation Department. They're going to South by Southwest in Austin in a couple weeks to do a pitch competition. They've received a number of grants and awards to continue their work. And it's for them, work that matters in so many different ways. And I think it really started with that. They wanted to affect change, but they started to see the change in themselves, became a lot more business minded, and a lot more design minded, and really kind of working with professionals, pitching this idea. So it's been this evolution of these learners, watching them take kind of this rough idea and bring it into the world and work with it for over 2 years. You don't really see that out of schools where students are able to find something they're passionate about and work with it for the duration. Usually it's kind of like, well, project's done, we're going to move on to a new project. And at One Stone, we really give the students the opportunity, if they love it, keep it going. I mean, they could probably spend another year or two on this thing before they could take it to market. And they might just do that. And so, I think that the work that matters is really going back to that how and allowing students to really engage and dig deep in a way that they see as relevant and meaningful.
So Chad, these projects are incredible. And I think, what's wonderful about them is they don't fit neatly into any one box, any one discipline. You've got to be able to understand statistics. You've got to be, not only literate in terms of, I'm thinking about the media literacy piece of it, where you've got to be able to be almost like an investigative journalist. You got to have a researcher's mindset to do this kind of work. I'm curious about, how does One Stone go about communicating this complex approach to education to colleges that are trying to sift through transcripts, and how do you communicate that on a transcript to help students move on to the next phase of their journey? Because I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of schools face is how do we package this in such a way that a college admissions rep is going to understand, so we don't end up cutting off opportunities for our students along the way.
Yeah, that's a really important question, because as soon as you start addressing the needs of the college admissions, you're changing what you do, because then students start seeing value in that 4-point, that ABC, and that end result. So we do not have grades, traditional grades at One Stone. We don't work with a 4-point grade scale, and we don't rank our students. So there's no GPA. We have 32 learning objectives that are broken into 4 quadrants of knowledge, mindset, creativity, and skills. Each quadrant has 8 different learning objectives that we work with. And we've developed something we call the growth transcript. And so you had mentioned that we're mastery-based. We're not necessarily mastery-based, we're growth-based. And so we really, we take all students. And so we have students who are on different spectrums of achievement when they come into One Stone, who might be 1 percentile on PSAT to 99th percentile. And by no means are we trying to get every student to the same finishing line. We're trying to instill love of learning and allowing them to see value and growth. And so for colleges, we've designed the growth transcript, which is kind of a visual representation of their progress, their progression, and growth through time in these 32 learning objectives. It requires a lot of work. We've put in hundreds of hours in phone calls, in inviting admissions to our school, to going out to schools and meeting with them, to going to the annual NACAC conference where all of the school reps are, and really trying to get the word out. It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I won't kid you there, but we believe what we're doing is very important, and we've really kind of held true to our values, as opposed to at the end, let's convert this thing into some type of letter grade. The students all get, at the end of every term, they get very detailed compiled feedback, written narratives and observations from all the coaches they've worked with on the different projects and courses and their advisor. Those are open to schools if they're willing to sift through if you're at the school for 3 years, you probably have 40 pages of compiled feedback. And so that's where we got that idea of the growth transcript, where we can really create a visualization of the learner's growth over time. And so that's how we do it. Trying to see if I have I've got a student's, I should show you a template, not a student's, but this is kind of I'll hold that up the best I can, but these are the 4 quadrants. Kind of looks like a graph of sorts. It's our growth transcript, and this is our FAQ, where it explains to the college admissions how to read it, what the different areas of the bold learning objectives are, and how we work with this. It's been a fascinating endeavor to get this thing out into the world, and we're actually working with a couple of different organizations and a couple different universities, and trying to find I guess more of like a virtual platform in which students can interact with the growth transcript. Because, I guess I'm kind of all over the place here, but another part of the growth transcript is students actually get input on where they are in regards to their progress on the growth progression. And so they're developing portfolios and developing their evidence and reflections to show, like, hey, I'm early proficient in the world of empathy, or in the world of grit, or ideation. And we talk about what that means. They develop the evidence in their portfolio, and we deliberate. And so it's a very holistic, very organic assessment process, something we really believe in. But getting schools to follow suit has been a challenge. But we've been very successful this year. I think we've had acceptances from 30 some odd different schools, from state schools to private schools, large schools, small schools. It's been really, really rewarding.
Sounds like you're living that Cal Newport book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. So it's really serves as kind of an inspiration for what's possible. And from my vantage point, it's wonderful that you're trying to be that shining light for
well, yeah. And I think, as you mentioned, like, as schools are digging through thousands of applications, what are they seeing? They're seeing so much of the same thing that it's getting to that point where it doesn't mean as much. So they can look at SAT scores, but again, what are they really seeing? Is there equity in the SAT? How much preparation did one individual put into it just to hack the test? They can read essays, and some personal essays are crafted beautifully by the student, and other not so much, with a lot of help from people in the outside world. And so I really think what they get from us is a much more honest, transparent, real picture of who the student is, who do they want walking around on their campus. And there's so much more to offer to a university than just the ability to consume knowledge. It's that ability to critically think and interact with knowledge that we're looking for in our learners today.
Well, Chad, I've got a ton more questions, but I want to toss it out to the rest of our panel. Maureen, Marianne, John, questions for Chad?
I have a question. Knowing what you now know, having built or co-built One Stone from the ground up, and thinking about us in, public education and a semi-traditional school that's trying to do some of this work and engage our students in, real work that matters and provide them opportunities for agency. What do you see, now looking into, more traditional school as the leverage point for schools that, are the key areas to focus on in order to make some of the movements and achieve some of the things that you've done?
I think that leverage point, to be honest, is just going back to our purpose statement, and is that we believe in the power of students. I really feel like, no fault to their own, but there's a lot of the relationship between students and educators or teachers is really kind of a hierarchical, I'm stuttering here, relationship where students do not feel empowered. They don't have voice. They don't really have, they don't have skin in the game in what their school looks like and what they're doing. And so, as much as like all the things that we're doing are innovative and unique, and people go, well, you're an independent school, you're a nonprofit. You couldn't do that at a, say a larger public school. I think there are a lot of things that we're doing that you could do and that you could take away. And that's our kind of, our mission right now, or one of our goals is to start breaking our program apart and be like, hey, what parts of these could, maybe work in a middle school classroom in a public school setting or a high school setting. And I think it really comes back to that, believing in the power of students and empowering student voice, giving them say in in discussion, giving them say and direction of their learning and input about their learning, I just think is so important, because when you do that and you instill trust and belief into a student, you have them. We could be doing all of the things that we're doing, and if we don't truly believe in the power of students, it's, we have our fail moments. We're like, whoa, that was terrible, right? And we step back like, what did we do? And it's like, you know what? It's because we weren't believing in the power of students. We weren't thinking about how we were doing things. We got so wrapped into what we were doing, we forgot about how we were doing it. And so to me, that's really, bare bones, strip it away. That is probably the most important thing that I think would be that leverage point that maybe you're talking about, or that we're looking for in the educational system. And I don't think I do think a lot of things need to change, but I don't think it's as radical as a notion as we all might think. And so, I guess that's our great challenge.
That's awesome.
Am I getting really dark? It's starting to get dark here. Should I turn the lights on?
Maybe the sunshine was coming through before.
Yeah,
You're okay.
Give me a quick second.
All right.
I don't know. Now it's light behind me, but
We'll edit that out.
So anyhow, I think that's the leverage point, is that belief in students and really allowing them to have agency in their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be laissez-faire agency, but the sense of agency in which they are learning alongside a teacher or a coach.
That's great.
So I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to start with one that you mentioned something earlier that I thought was really interesting. I wanted to ask further. You talked about having common language within your school of how you talk about it. And our leadership team recently was reading some chapters together of the Culture Code. And a piece of the chapters we were just talking about and reading about were all about the use of language in this, restaurant, and they talked about this guy in New York. And I'd be interested in what is some of that culture, that building language that you have and developed. That's kind of my first question. And I also really like to think about when we hire new people, once you know what that culture of the language is, how do you instill that or share that with those people that you're hiring at the beginning of that interview process? We have a recruitment fair coming up. We haven't done that before, and we have that in a week. So it's fresh in my mind of how do we tell them this is what our district is about, and we're working on that, but then make sure you're getting the right people. So it's kind of twofold, but if you could start with the common language, that would be helpful.
Yeah, the common language, and that's hard, because really when you're changing the vernacular, you're changing the language of everybody involved. Sometimes you slip and you forget, but I think there are some core concepts and terms that we really try and use. For example, just referring to ourselves as coaches, we say students, but we think of all of ourselves as learners. But we've developed a one-stone glossary. And so we've got this multi-page glossary. It's in a Google Doc that every time we're like, we put a lot of time and energy into our course names, into language that we use, and we capture it as much as we can. Our learning objectives, the bold learning objectives, it's actually an acronym, the BLOB. We love them. And, we thought, this thing's crazy. Who's going to buy into it? We're like, you know what? For the very reason that it's crazy, we're going with the blob. And a lot of times when I talk about it, I talk about these skills, how they transfer over, and you just can't see passion as a skill just stuck in this quadrant. It bleeds into the area of knowledge and creativity. It bleeds into mindset. And so we really look at this amorphous sense of our learning objectives. But having that glossary is really important, and it reminds us. It's kind of that reset. We'll go back through and we'll talk about language, but we'll also talk about how we're talking in collaborative situations. We do a lot of yes and we do deliberate practice of yes and. And then, let's try and see what it looks like when we say no, but. And so we practice that with our learners, with our coaches. We do a lot of modeling, not just, to our learners, but with our coaches in staff meetings. And so we will start all staff meetings the same way we ask students to start their meetings when they have a meeting with a community partner. And so we always have kind of just basic introductions around the circle and some type of one-stone question. And, they're great. They're usually these zany, creative questions that are really kind of designed to instill creativity, break the ice, and have fun. And so a lot of our attempts at kind of changing language is also changing just how we do things. I think really kind of fosters that sense of not just talking about it differently, but doing it differently. Pushes us to continue that change in vernacular. And I don't know if that answers the question. When we onboard new coaches,
basically, I would just want to see your glossary now.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, I want to see that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty funny. I can share some stuff with you, and I don't even know what's in there anymore because we just talk, right? It'd be like, but anyway, I think like we do a lot of that discussion when we onboard new coaches. We talk about the importance of language. We talk about the importance of action and behavior. And so, if whatever you're doing, requires a whiteboard, putting that expo marker in the hands of the student and letting them be up there and run the brainstorm or whatever it is that we're doing that requires that, and really getting the student up front and center. And so it goes beyond language. It goes a lot to just how we interact and how we do things.
And so that second part is, you talked about what you're looking for in characteristics in people who you hire. And so I think you gave a really great list there. I'm sitting next to you. We're at some sort of recruitment fair where we're going to meet people. What would be, what's like some key questions? What are you looking for? And when you're going to meet someone, interview, consider them, any key questions that are your favorites?
Gosh, I asked for a lot of examples, give me some examples of, but no, I asked them what they're passionate about. If they could create a course, or any type of course or a project, what would it be? Right. And I'm like, don't even talk about discipline. Don't talk about science or math. Like, if you could do one thing, what would it be? And how would you go about learning? Like, what resources would you use? If you put a group together, how would you help them get on board? And, ask those types of questions and ask them what their educational experience has been like. But, oftentimes when you start asking them about things they want to learn, you really see what they're passionate about. And I think as much as we are student driven, and the students see this, it's really important that you get coaches who are passionate about certain areas as well. Because we have students who are pursuing, the field of law that had absolutely no interest in law. And, we got a coach who is interested in law and started working with them in criminal law and constitutional law. And now we've got like 4 or 5 students who were just devouring it, and they want to get into government. They want to pursue politics. They're doing Model United Nations and mock trial. And, they want to go on to explore politics and law. When they started at the school, there was just no way. If you're like, hey, you want to study law? No way. But as soon as you do some type of project or interaction with the students where you are sharing your passion with them, it's just infectious, and they take it and run. So really, for me, it's really important to find out what our coaches are passionate about and what they love to do outside of the brick and mortar, outside of the traditional context.
Those are great examples. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Chad, I had a question for you, and it's kind of building off of Mary Ann's question about leverage points. Just interested, having been a director of a school, an educator in a lot of different formats, and now the creator of a school, how different do you think the challenge is to create a new school that's really living this evolved reimagination of education, as opposed to transforming an existing school? I guess what I'm looking for is advice to people who are working in traditional schools, who are doing the work to make school look a little more aspirational, like yours is.
Yeah, I think That's a good question. I think it depends on what kind of school you're trying to either start or transform. I think because of the stakes in a high school, and you're thinking about outcomes, and you're thinking about being able to keep those doors to college open. Um, it's suddenly. I mean, we felt it. We were starting a school from scratch. Our first 2 months, we didn't even have a building. We were somewhat nomadic. We had 32 learners, and it was amazing. Very place based. And great, but still in the back of my head was like, all right, these are year one kids, they're sophomores. But man, what are colleges going to think? So you kind of get yourself into that mindset. And I think, starting say a new middle school, there's a lot less risk involved per se. But I would say that by far starting a school, I think, is a lot easier than transforming a school, because transforming a school requires you to unlearn. And all of the students that we are onboarding and bringing into One Stone have come from traditional contexts. Well, not all, most. I'd say 95% of our students are coming from very traditional contexts. And there is a learning curve, and there's an unpacking of the way we do things, and the way in which we and learn and see each other and trust each other and allow vulnerability amongst each other. I would think that would be challenging in the transformation of a school, but I think where you start again is that relationship with the students. Not even in the programming, just start with that relationship with students and transform there. And I think that when you start with the student in the middle and you empower the student, it's a lot easier, because they can be very helpful in that process of unlearning and unpacking the ways that we have once done things. So this seems very kind of abstract, but I think it's a lot easier to start a school because you don't have to go through all those kind of unlearning or unschooling the traditional context. But in transformation of schools, I think small steps are okay. I think that's absolutely acceptable to start looking at your school and really taking an inventory of how you do things and what it is you're doing, and finding out where that starting point is, and going from there. And I think if you bring the students on board, it's not seen as a school is transforming itself for you. It is the students are helping transform the school. And I think you can do things a lot quicker and a lot easier. So that's just that would be my take. If I were to walk into a school and they ask me, like, we have a 5-year goal to change and be a highly innovative, student-centered, student-led school. Take it away, Chad. I would not start with the programs. I would start with relationships with students.
Mm-hmm.
That's really great advice. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think what you were saying just there with starting with the students and, trying to remake a school, it reminds me of something that Deb Meyer said, when she was asked about her secret sauce, like, it's wanting it bad enough, right? That having this vision, you talk about wanting to start a revolution within education, which I think is a really powerful vision. I'm curious about who your influences were that helped you to arrive at this vision for education and taking the bold steps that you've taken to make this vision a reality.
Man. I have a lot of different, are you thinking mentors, like people along the way, or
I'm thinking both. I think, we're shaped by what we read, and then we're shaped by who we see. And I'm kind of curious about the mixture of both that's created One Stone.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll go back to my first year of working in education, when I was a middle school Spanish teacher and a 6th grade social science teacher. And I was on the 6th grade team, and I had a cohort. We were about 4 or 5 teachers on this team, and really, I had no idea what I was doing. I just had no idea what I was doing, and hadn't had a lot of experience working with middle school students, other than the fact that I had been one, and and that was so I had a tainted vision of what a middle school student was, and really being with people who trusted me and allowed me to take risks. and allowed me to try different things in the classroom and allowed me to fail, allowed me to learn from failure, and really saw me as somebody who was engaging in learning how to learn and learning how to work with students. And so there were a couple of individuals on that team that I think collectively just really helped shape how I see education today. And I've held that, that view through my career. I've always had close relationships with students. I've just felt that is genuinely the most important thing you can do at the end of every day. If you're going home with students who trust you, who look up to you, who want to hang out with you after school, you're doing a good job. And so, you know, and I got that in my first year or two of teaching, and I think that was just so formational for me. And so I think being around positive leaders are very important. They don't have to be formal school leaders in administration. They can also just be informal leaders who you're around. I think that's really important, and it's probably been the most important influence in me. And then I think the other most influential factor has been the student. I've worked in, like I said, a couple of different prep schools. I worked down in Bogota, Colombia, where, you know, I'm pretty good at Spanish. I wouldn't say I was fluent. They didn't hire me to speak Spanish. They wanted me just speaking English, but I realized that if I was going to really connect with the kids, I had to have relationships where I was speaking their language. And it really just, you know, helped me slow down and listen to them and you know, listen to what they needed. I think sometimes we get wrapped up in achievement and wrapped up in end goals and outcomes, and the student gets lost along the way. And so when I really step back and listen to what they needed, it's helped form who I am today as far as a leader and a coach or somebody in education. So without naming specific names, I think that first year that I taught was really important, and then just drawing from the wisdom of my students, because they hold so much. I mean, really the answer to all this is in the students in the classroom. I mean, they can tell you what they need and what they want when you work with them close enough.
So Chad, you've been super generous with your time, and you know, we're coming up on the end of our interview, and I just kind of want to close off with a question about, you know, we see One Stone as what's possible in the future, but there's this idea of going from someday to Monday. So for the many people who will watch this and get inspired, what are some action steps that you can take, you know, next week, next month, to get the ball rolling, to make your school more student-centered, more innovative?
Well, I think place-based learning is really important. I think, and I guess I was doing an interview earlier this week, and they asked me what was my biggest surprise in you know, getting One Stone off the ground and doing things differently. And for me, the biggest surprise has been the power of the community to help shape the experiences of our students. And so, you know, and when you involve the community, the kids are really seeing the relevancy of what they're doing. I mean, it's their world. These things aren't untied from reality anymore. And so I think, I guess my piece of advice, or, you know, what I would have to say is find ways to get the community involved or get your students out into the community, regardless of what you're doing. And if you are a disciplinary focused school where you're really looking at learning broken up into subjects, and you've got, you know, your math and your science and your history, whatever it is, all of that can be worked with in the community. Whether that's where you're bringing in community leaders and community partners, or you're working with organizations out there. And so my biggest surprise has been the willingness and desire of community members to come in and work with our students and share their passions. And I think, you know, one of the community members who came in and shared his passions with the school in coding and cybersecurity is now a full-time coach at the school, because he loved what he was doing so much, and the impact that working with students that was having on his life and making him really enjoy the fulfillment of working with students. He gave up his career in as a patent attorney and is now full-time with us, working in the sciences, mathematics, and computer programming. And it's just awesome. The kids love them. And, I just see our coaches just thriving when they start getting the kids outside of the four walls and bringing community members in. So that would be my advice as a starting point, one of many.
Well, again, Chad, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to share my screen. The website, is that coming up, Marianne? We'll share. Hang on one second. Oops, sorry about that. The website is onestone.org. Coming up. Check it out. It's got an overview of their high school, their programs, their events, to learn more. Chad, if you're ever finding yourself in New England, no matter the time of the season, know that Mendon Upton and Nipmuc Regional has a spot for you to come and hang out. And if we're ever in your neck of the woods, hopefully we can come and check out the incredible work that you're doing.
Well, I appreciate that, and each of you are always invited and welcome to One Stone. If you make it out to Boise for whatever reason, it's a great small town, and I do plan on taking you up on your offer. I want to come see what you guys are doing. So I appreciate the lively discussion and your interest in what we're doing at One Stone.
Well, I know that March is like probably the best and most beautiful time of year to come out to New England. And I know it's a late invite now, but we've got our Inspired Learning Convention coming up a week from tomorrow on March the 8th. 2020, we'll probably have it around the same time. So if you'd love to come out, we'd love to have you come out and present. For those of you who are watching, there's registration spots still available. If you go to inspiredlearningproject.com, click on the convention link. You can find our full schedule and the registration link. We've got Pam Moran and Iris Sokol coming as our keynote speakers. We got a workshop from Beth Holland. We're very excited. Almost 100 sessions to choose from. It's going to be a really fantastic day of learning, and so fortunate to have my partners with us and our colleagues at Mendon Upton pulling together to put this together. So again, Chad, thanks so much for being with us. Really insightful conversation. I know that I'm taking a lot away from it. So for John, Marianne, and Maureen, I'm Dave Quinn. This is the Inspired Learning Project. We'll see you in March.